Hello everyone, this is Michelle here. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to episode 2 of Crime Stories Sunday. And this is the terrifying tale of the serial killer psychopath, Israel Keyes. I'm walking in the woods in the midst of a storm on the morning of Halloween. Perhaps this is the perfect setting to talk about a man who can only be described as the devil himself. Let's get into it all. Israel Keyes, arsonist, burglar, bank robber, rapist and mass murderer. He admitted to FBI agents when finally apprehended that his violent crime spree started as early as 1996 with the sexual assault of a teenage girl in Oregon. But his spree of crimes that had no pattern, no set location, and were so carefully planned that he evaded capture for many, many years. And it was only after the rape and murder of his final victim in February 2012 that he was finally apprehended. And he took his own life whilst in jail awaiting trial. An FBI report stated that Keyes burglarised between 20 and 30 homes across the US. He wasn't location specific. He would go all over the United States to commit violent crimes. And the FBI claim that he's linked to 11 deaths, 11 murders in the United States. But the truth is, he died before all of the truth came out. So he took many, many secrets to his grave. So Israel Keyes was born on January the 7th, 1978 in Cove, Utah. He was born to a Mormon family and he was the second of 10 children. His parents, Heidi and John Keyes, were very, very strict, very authoritarian, very religious. And Israel and his siblings were homeschooled. They had minimal contact with the outside world. When Israel Keyes was 5, the family, however, rejected Mormonism and moved to an area near Colville in Washington. And here, this must have been such a bizarre childhood. They lived in a one-room cabin without electricity or running water. The family attended services at 2 churches, the Ark and the Christian Israel Covenant Church, which is known to have practiced white supremacist ideologies. Israel Keyes, during the many hours of interrogation with the FBI, he described this community and his upbringing as militia-like. Now, whether this upbringing had anything at all to do with the crimes that he went on to commit, I can't tell you that. No one can tell you that for sure. What I can say, though, is that perhaps this militia-like attention to detail, authoritarian type of upbringing might have led him to be very, very detailed and very well planned in the way that he went on to commit crimes. But that's just my opinion. You see, the rest of his siblings, his other 9 siblings, didn't go on to become serial killers or rapists or arsonists or bank robbers. So Israel stood out. He truly lived a double life. Anyway, Israel went on to denounce the Christian faith, and by his teenage years he became interested in Satanism. But in his young adulthood he seemed to be well functioning, seemed to be a normal member of society. Indeed, he joined the United States Armed Forces and he served between 1998 and 2001 at Fort Lewis, Fort Hood in Egypt. And former army friends said that he was quiet. He was a normal guy, kept himself to himself. However, at weekends he liked to overindulge in his favourite alcoholic beverage, bourbon. So he's a heavy drinker. Again, does any of this have anything to do with what he went on to do? No, because actually his violent crime spree had started before he joined the armed forces. In 2007, Keyes started a construction business in Alaska called Keyes Construction. And there he lived with his girlfriend and his daughter in his double life. And he was doing well. Keyes Construction was doing well. He did handyman jobs, contractor jobs and construction. And he was settled down. Was he though? Now let's start going through all of the things that he did. So Keyes, as I said, wasn't location specific and he wasn't victim specific. He seemed to just enjoy committing violent crimes for the hell of it, for the fun of it. This is the mark of the true psychopathic criminal. He targeted random people across the United States. And one of the key ways that he avoided detection was that he planned so long in advance. He would generally choose isolated locations, but not exclusively. And his way of killing, his preferred way of killing, was strangulation, because he liked to see his victims suffer. He liked to see the pain in their face as they struggled to gasp their final breaths. He vowed, and he never did, to our knowledge, that he'd never kill children or adults in the vicinity of children. He seemed to want to protect children, which I find interesting. Now, was this because during kind of the major elements of his crime spree he had his own daughter? Or was it, this is just speculation, was it that he saw himself as a child, he saw himself as a wounded child, wounded by his life? Don't know, and we'll never know. We'll never know. So Keyes admitted to investigators, once he was apprehended, and we'll get into all of that he killed 4 people in Washington when he lived in Washington, but he was never apprehended. In fact, he was cited in Thurston County for driving without a valid licence, and he pled guilty to driving under the influence another time. But these are minor crimes compared to what Israel was actually doing, that the FBI, law enforcement, had no idea about. And the FBI were confused when he was finally apprehended. You can see them on the FBI tapes, thumbing through case after case to try to get Israel to open up, and just how many unsolved violent crimes they could possibly link to him. He admitted to some, but not others, because his untimely death put pay to the conclusion of this horrific story. So yeah, let's get into these murders. So while under interrogation, he claimed that he committed his first murder in 1998. And this was shortly before he joined the armed forces. And he took a hiatus for 3 years while he was in the military. And he resumed his killing spree in 2001, following his discharge. Keyes confessed to at least 1 murder in New York State, but at the time of his death, FBI agents had not managed to identify this person. Even their age and gender are unknown. And exactly where in New York State the murder was alleged to have occurred. That's one thing, one of many things that Keyes took to his grave. Keyes did own 10 acres of land in New York State and a dilapidated cabin in the town of Constable. So was it in that area? We'll never know. He also confessed to 2 bank robberies, and the FBI later confirmed that Keyes had robbed the community bank in Tupper Lake, New York. This was April 2009. Why? For the money? For the hell of it? Who knows? Who knows? The FBI claimed that Keyes may have killed a woman called Deborah Feldman in April 2009, in New Jersey. And in fact, they did find her body near Tupper Lake, so close to where that bank robbery had taken place that very month. So they think there's a high probability that Israel Keyes is responsible for Deborah's death. But again, we'll never truly know. Now, this one he did admit to. This is horrible. He admitted to killing Bill and Lorraine Courier of Essex, Vermont. Keyes broke into their Courier's home on the night of June the 8th, 2011, tied them up before driving them to an abandoned farmhouse. He terrorised and eventually shot Bill before sexually assaulting and strangling Lorraine. But he'd been planning a murder in that area for at least 2 years, because 2 years prior to the Courier's deaths, he had hidden one of his kill kits in that vicinity near their home. So whether he'd been targeting them individually for 2 years, or whether he just knew he would commit a murder in that area, it was a good area for him to commit murder, and they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, we'll never know. So many unanswered questions in this case, but one of the key elements to how Keyes evaded capture for so long was that he planned murders long in advance with extraordinary precision. You see, unlike most serial killers, most violent criminals, he doesn't have a profile. He doesn't have anything that the FBI profilers can put together as a modus operandi or anything. He didn't fit a mould, and he never killed in the same area twice, and that's unlike many serial killers. Many serial killers, they kind of range out from their place of residence, and they range out, a few miles. And you can then kind of fit together a profile. But not Israel, no. He had no connection to these victims that we know of. You see, what he did for the Courier murders, he flew to Chicago, where he rented a car, and then he drove 1,000 miles to Vermont. He then used the kill kit that he'd hidden 2 years before. These were large buckets with everything he could possibly need for a murder hidden inside. So it's not like the FBI could go and look at, surveillance footage at Walmart or anywhere to get an idea of where a killer might have bought their implements, their murder weapons. There was none of that with Israel because he planned it so far in advance. Keyes' last known victim was 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. She was a barista at a coffee booth in his hometown of Anchorage, Alaska. And many people have talked about this particular killing and said that this was Israel's downfall. Now, whether he was getting so hooked on murder that he committed one in his hometown and he'd never done that before. Was the itch to murder too strong at this time? Or was he just getting sloppy because he got away with so many crimes for so many years? Maybe he was just getting sloppy. It's seen on CCTV at the coffee booth of Samantha serving him a coffee and then him kind of jumping through the coffee booth window. And in the darkened booth, he apprehended her. He frog marched her across the car park. And he actually took her to his home. He held her in a shed at his home, his girlfriend and daughter's home, who, it is alleged, were home at the time. So he was getting cocky, but also he thought he was omnipotent. He thought he was cleverer than everybody. Again, a trait of a true psychopath. This kidnapping, which took place on February the 1st. He stole her debit card. Whilst holding her hostage, he sexually assaulted her. And he went inside. Left her there, still alive, went inside, came back a few hours later, and he murdered her. He then left her body in the shed at the home of his girlfriend and daughter. And he went on a cruise. He went to New Orleans, where he departed on this cruise, this pre-booked 2-week cruise. So did he know he was going to commit a murder and then he'd just disappear shortly after? Probably. Who knows? He was there with his family and he cruised the Gulf of Mexico. When he returned to Alaska, right, and Samantha's body was still in the shed, what he then did was astonishingly horrific. This is just horrific. He returned to her body and he put makeup on her face and he actually sewed her eyelids open so she looked alive. He took photographs of her with a 4-day-old newspaper and he sent this to her family demanding $30,000. And then he disposed of her body in a lake just north of Anchorage. So this was February the 1st. So he went on his cruise and then he came back, demanded the ransom, and then went on with his life. This was the beginning of the end. Police were able to track withdrawals from her debit card. This is really sloppy for a seasoned killer. Keyes was finally arrested by Texan Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn in a parking lot on the morning of March the 13th, 2012. They pulled him for a speeding violation. He was going only 3 miles over the speed limit. So those 3 miles over the speed limit caught him. And it was his odd behaviour during the traffic stop that really sealed his fate. All the law enforcement agencies throughout the United States had been notified of this guy on the run. And the vehicle he was driving matched the description of the vehicle that had been seen on CCTV footage when he was making withdrawals using Samantha's debit card. He'd gone through New Mexico, Arizona, and then finally arrested in Texas. He was then extradited to Alaska, where he confessed to the murder, and it is alleged that he said, "You got your monster. You got your monster." He was indicted for this case, and his trial was scheduled to begin in March 2013, so a year after his arrest. Now, this is where the many hours of FBI tapes are so revealing. And they are on YouTube. The sound is dreadful, but they are on YouTube. Just kind of look up like Israel Keyes FBI tapes or something like that, and they come up. Keyes looked bored in some of the footage. You know, he yawned. He was laughing like weirdly, like insanely laughing. But FBI agents kept him talking and talking and talking. He cooperated to an extent, but the FBI agents, you know, they'd been around. They'd been around the block. And they kind of knew he was playing them. You know, it was like a game of cat and mouse. And it was like they struck a deal with him.
To trade in for something you might need later. True? Oh, yeah. Not much else. Well, that's the thing is, you know, this whole clue idea, you know, might give us a little short-term solution to keep this thing moving the way we want it to move. And maybe even get you something in the short term. You know, if you're thinking about, like, you know, you give a clue and, you know, you want lunch or something like that. I mean, that's something that can be worked out.
You need a candy bar.
I know, that's why I think, you know, I don't know if he feels guilty about it, but...
If you had a cigar, you'd probably pass out if you had a cigar right now.
But I mean, the notion of this whole idea is, you know, you come over, we keep keep things going, at least on a smaller scale. You're not giving up anything in terms of trading value, but you're giving us credibility with other people we have to deal with. You're not giving us any useful information really, other than, all right, well, we got, a night in Washington. It's not like you're going to solve the clue game on that, like Professor Plum in the library. But it gives us a little bit of, stuff to go back with people and buy time and buy what we need to buy. And, in the short term, you have short-term needs that you think, might be fun to have sushi.
He would talk if they kept him supplied with coffee, cigars, chocolate bars, and any food of his choice. And what he really wanted in return for talking was an early death sentence. He wanted to die. And he wanted all of it kept out of the media. That was one of his very careful stipulations. He wanted it all kept out of the media. For him to just confess, for them to kill him, and it be done with no media attention, because he said he was trying to protect his daughter. So there again, it's weird that he seemed to have compassion for children, for his own daughter, but for other people's children, he would not kill in the vicinity of children. So, at least that's something, I guess. But he was only cooperative up to a point. On May 23rd, 2012, he attempted an escape while at a preliminary hearing. And how he did this, he broke his leg irons and jumped over a railing. But they tasered him and got him back. So, he confessed to some things, but he was vague on some details, vague on a lot of details. And unfortunately, his cooperation just completely came to an end when his story was leaked to the media. And although FBI agents tried to repair the situation, he wasn't having any of it. He had access to the media whilst he was in jail. And he just found out and he said, no more, I'm done. So on December the 2nd, 2012, he took his own life. Somehow, and it's unknown to this day how, he got a razor blade, he slit his wrists, and he was found face down in his cell in a pool of blood. He ensured his own death by wrapping kind of like a sheet, like a section of a sheet, round his neck, and then tying it to his feet, holding his feet up, and then when he actually died, his feet would drop and he would then choke to death if blood loss didn't kill him. All those years as a murderer, he wasn't afraid to be gruesome to himself, which is terrifying. There was a suicide note that the FBI were able to recover from the pool of blood, but there was no kind of details in there that could be used to identify any other murder victims. In 2020, the FBI released drawings that he'd done when he was in jail, and there's a picture of 11 skulls, and they think that these 11 skulls represented the 11 murder victims, but who knows, that could have just been another game. So Israel Keyes went to his death with many, many, many secrets. He was truly, truly terrifying. And in my opinion, he was a true psychopath. The term psychopath gets bandied about. Like everybody talks about narcissism and psychopathy. But this guy, in my opinion, was a true psychopath. He was manipulative, lacked empathy. He had this kind of, this illusion of his own grandeur. And he was just a horrific, terrifying person. It doesn't perhaps surprise you, one of his most admired people was Ted Bundy. And although he shared some similarities with Ted Bundy as being just, completely lacking in empathy, Bundy didn't have this planning element to his crimes that Israel Keyes had. And also Bundy targeted young women, whereas Keyes had, as we've already seen, no particular victim in mind. He just killed for the hell of it. Terrifying. But this storm is raging this Halloween. I believe this is the perfect setting to talk about such a horrible man. I'm quite sure that Israel Keys is now residing unrestfully in hell. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments below. Let me know what cases you'd like to see in future episodes of Crime Stories Sunday. There'll be a different case every single week. 8 p.m. UK time will be the premiere of every single episode. I've been Michelle. I hope you're doing well. Goodbye from Miss Tillington, Miss Cassie Springer. Bye, guys.